Assignment 4A is Tribble Trouble. And this comes from a famous episode of Star Trek, the original series, in which Enterprise spaceship encountered a Tribble. And Tribbles multiply very rapidly, much faster than rabbits. Each Tribble gives birth to 10 Tribbles every 12 hours, and they are born pregnant. So we want to create an app that says how many days do we have to return to the spaceport or to Earth before we're overrun with Tribbles and the spaceship explodes because of the number of Tribbles. So the reality is we have only 9 days, but how many Tribbles will we have after a certain number of days? And that's the calculation we're going to do. And this is an exercise in using loops. So we'll create an app that takes the number of days, click the button, and give some output in terms of the number of Tribbles on board after that day. And here's some sample data. And we're going to use a unsigned integer of 64 bits for our data type. That allows us to have a very large number, larger than just a normal int. So we use a control structure of an if-else, make sure it's not greater than 9, and another control structure where we're going to go through a loop. So that's our problem. I'm going to show you how to do this both with storyboards and with SwiftUI. So I'd like you to pause here and try this yourself. And if you struggle, come back and watch either of my solutions, Storyboard or SwiftUI. Here's my storyboard solution to the Tribble Trouble project. And the project itself I set up just to do portrait, both iPhone and iPad. I went into assets and created a new image asset for Tribbles and dragged the 3 resolutions from the Finder to the 1x, 2x, and 3x. Let's take a look at the storyboard. So in the storyboard, I started with a label, give it a font of bold 23, and then a text view, right, added in the text about what the problem is. Here we have a label, days before return, and a text field. I put in a default value of 6, lined it to the right, and gave it a yellow background. Then we have a button with the text of how much trouble are we in. That's our title for the button, or our caption. Gave it a nice little maroon background. And then another label, it's going to be for our output, and that one is set to system 17. And then finally, I brought an image view in and assigned it the image of Tribbles. You need that here in the drop down. So it'll show all the images you have in your assets here. So you want to do the assets first before you create that image view. Then in terms of the coding, I brought the view controller up. I'm going to hide this panel over here. And we'll hide our panel on the right-hand side. So I created outlets both for the days of text, that's going to be our input, and for our output label. And then I created an action for the button, and here you can see the code that I did for the action. So we're going to have a constant called start Tribbles that's going to start with 1. And notice I'm using a uint 64. It's an unsigned integer of 64 bits, so we can't do negatives. It's going to be only positives, but it gives us a very large number. The total days is another integer. I'm going to take the days text.text. We're going to unwrap that and put that into int. Total cycles is going to be the total of days times 2 because they give birth every 12 hours. So we're going to multiply by 2 for 24 hours. And then the current Tribbles, we're going to do the start Tribbles of 1. And then if that total days is less than 10, then we'll go through the cycle of our for loop to figure out how many Tribbles there are at the end of that cycle, at the end of those number of days. If it's greater than 10, then our else here is if you go more than 9 days, the spaceship will burst at the seams with Tribbles. That's going to be what goes into our text property or attribute of the output label. Otherwise, once we've gone through this calculation, and here all we're doing is in the calculation is going through the loop for 1 into total cycles. That's going to be really the number of days with 2 per cycle. And the current Tribbles plus equals is going to be current Tribbles times 10. Remember, they each give birth to 10 every 12 hours. So our output then would be in, we're going to concatenate, we're going to interpolate total days. There will be, and again, interpolate the total, and again, interpolate the current Tribbles, Tribbles on board the enterprise. Let's just try this. So here's my project running in the iPhone 14 Pro. A little problem here is I designed this for an older version of the iPhone, and so my title is cut off up here on the title bar. So I just need to make a slight adjustment. I'm going to come back. I'm going to stop. Let's come back here. I'm just going to move everything down a little bit. So we have some room at the top. I didn't use any constraints. That'd be one other way we could do this, but since I'm designing just for this one phone, I'm just gonna move things down. Let's try that and see how that looks. Much better. Now the iPhone 14 Pro is very long, so as we get a bunch of blank space down here at the bottom. I'm gonna change this to 1 day. 1 day we should have 121 tribbles, and that's what we get. 2 days, they've rapidly multiplied to 14,641. If we go 9 days, actually go 7 days, that was one of the data examples I gave you. And if we go 9 days, we're still safe, but we've got a huge number of tribbles. If we were to go 10 days, we're told if you go more than 9 days, the spaceship will burst at the seams with tribbles. Everything seems to be working there. Now, the one problem we do have here is if we put in, say, a 0, it's going to crash on us. So let's add a guard statement up here on our input to make sure it's going to be valid. I don't need to unwrap that. We need an else and a closing bracket. And what we're going to do here is add some output text that simply says invalid entry. And then I need to return. I'm not returning any value. So if I just put a return statement here, that will cause the function to stop. Let's try this again with some invalid data. So validated works. If I put in a 0, we get an error still because of the number of cycles. So I'm going to add another if statement here. So if total days is less than 1, we'll copy that information, paste in, and so again we'll say invalid entry must be a positive value. Let's try this again. So always want to test and try to break our application because the user will probably do something that doesn't work if we don't take care of that. So now we get a 0, we get invalid entry, must be a positive value. If I type in, say, ABC, how much trouble are we in? We get an invalid entry. If I type in a minus number, we get invalid entry. And if we go back to a positive value, let's say 3, we get output that shows the number of tribbles. So that's the storyboard solution. If you want to, you can continue watching here if you want to see the SwiftUI solution. Let's take a look at doing the Tribble project using SwiftUI. So I created a new project. I named it 04A Tribble SwiftUI and chose SwiftUI as my interface. What we get here is our content view and our assets. So in assets, I brought in that image of Captain Kirk with the Tribbles again. I also set up 2 colors, and you can do that again with the plus sign down here and choose color set. So I created an input yellow and a maroon. And then in our content view, inside the struct for content view, I created 2 state variables, one for days, that's going to be the value that's in our yellow input box, and one for output, that's going to be what's displayed in this blue label. And I have my variable body, some view, and I start with a VStack. So everything's going to be stacked vertically. We'll start with text of the Trouble with Tribbles. That's going to be our title. I used a title font attribute and made it bold. Then a text view that contains the information about the problem. So in choosing a color for the text, in the drop down, you're going to see the asset colors that you set up. So we have maroon and input yellow accent colors coming from our system. Then I have a horizontal stack with a text for the label and a text view for the input. Gave it a little padding, aligned it to the right, gave it some definitive size, and set the background color again to that input yellow. And gave it a little rounded corner. Set the padding of the horizontal stack to 5, and then we have a button. How much trouble are we in? And our action for that button is going to be output, that's our variable, equals how much trouble. That's a method that I define down below. We'll look at that in a minute. Again, some padding, background color, foreground color. I give it a font of .title2, predefined weight, and then our output text is going to be the string output. Actually, I really don't need that there. I think I can just do output and be just fine. And then our font, again, title 2, foreground color blue, gave a little padding. The image I set to Tribbles. You're going to make sure you add that Tribbles image into your assets before you set that up there. Made it resizable, aspect ratio, I wanted it to fit and scaled to fit, and so it fits my phone perfectly and maintains the correct aspect. And then that whole V stack, I gave it a padding of 15 units all the way around. Here's that how much trouble function. It's basically the same thing we did in the previous version using the storyboard. I just made a few modifications here. So I'm testing to make sure the days is positive, make sure it's less than 10. If it is less than 10, we'll calculate the number of days. Otherwise, we're going to give a warning that's going to explode. And if I use the if let up here at the top, if let total days equals int days, if that's not a numeric integer, then we're going to get that's invalid input for the number of days to return. That should take care of all the possibilities. I'm going to just run it here rather than in the emulator. So how much trouble are we in? See the number of days there for 4. We know that 1 should be 121 and 2 should be 14,641. That all seems to work. If we go 9, we're going to get that huge number. And if we go 10, we're going to told the spaceship will burst at the seams. If we put in nothing, invalid input. If I put in a -3, can't enter the time warp, enter a positive date value for days. Again, if we put in 0, same thing. So all the possibilities there are taken care of. I guess one thing we didn't do was alpha text, so ABC, and again, invalid input. So that's the SwiftUI solution. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the iOS app development cohort playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos that I create, you can click my picture up in the top right and subscribe to the channel.